Okay, so let's begin, shall we? Hello and welcome. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Dan Candido with Interfacing Technologies, and I'll be your moderator today. Let me first thank you for taking the time out to attend today's webinar. Before we begin, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, type them into the questions module to the right of your screen on your control panel. And there will be a survey following this for you to suggest topics, give feedback, and ask any questions. Did you miss something? Well, you'll receive an email in about 48 hours after the webinar with links to the webinar, link to today's slide deck, and contact information. Let's look at today. We'll start with the quick look at interfacing, followed by featured speakers and a demo. We'll also have a Q&A following up. But first, let's take a little bit about interfacing itself. Interfacing has been a market leader for over 30 years. We now reach more than 1 million users globally and offer 24/7 support. Interfacing is deployed in well over 50+ countries and across most vertical and industries. Interfacing is 27001 certified and GDPR compliant. Interfacing has been recognized consistently year on year for their leadership as a digital twin provider, a leader in eBPA solutions, covering a variety of use cases, including IMS, QMS, BCM, low-code automation, business and enterprise architecture and analysis, as well as business operating systems and operational intelligence. Interfacing accomplishes all of this within our digital integration management system environment, providing solutions for QMS, quality management systems, business process management, document and records management, business continuity management, low-code automation, and is an integral part of GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. We are joined today by our partner, Deloitte. Deloitte is the largest professional services network in the world. It is also known as one of the Big Four consulting and accounting firms. Deloitte provides audit, consulting, financial advisory, risk advisory, tax, and legal services with more than 400,000 professionals globally. Our guests, Christian and Alexander, represent Deloitte's risk advisory and specialize in the field of regulatory and compliance. They're both based in Germany. Also joining us today will be Mirko Thomas, Managing Director at Interfacing, demonstrating with several practical use cases on how interfacing is an integrated management system reduces complexity. Interfacing and Deloitte have been working together in the digital transformation of regulatory compliance, risk, and quality management systems for many years, and we're happy to have Christian and Alexander with us today to discuss the topic of integrated management systems. With that, I would like to welcome. The screen is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. And thank you for having me and Alexander as a guest in your webinar series today. Dan, you already introduced my background a bit, but perhaps before we deep dive into the conversation, I can talk a little bit about my connection to the topic and why I'm actually here to talk about integrated management systems today, what qualifies me for the topic, and what's my connection to it. Integrated management systems is something that I have developed quite a passion for over my professional career. And to be honest, this passion was largely grown out of frustration with the complexity that you find in many large organizations. And a number of people here in the call may already have an idea of what that may mean. When I look back along my career path, I came in touch with a number of different so-called management systems. And I have worked in them and seen them evolve over the time. I started my career in the enterprise risk management space, which is the first management system I came across during my time at a pharmaceutical company. And this was a time when enterprise risk management as a management system was still quite new. It was a consequence of accounting scandals around Enron and WorldCom in 2001 and 2002, and also a consequence of the financial crisis triggered by Lehman in the late first decade, 2008, I guess. And many legislators required as a consequence from there that companies better anticipate and report risks and establish controls over their financial reporting. And this is how enterprise risk management and internal control systems were born. And this is also how I got my first job. So otherwise, my life may have gone into a different direction. So how did we actually approach this? I was tasked with mapping out business processes, track risks along those processes, conduct risk interviews, build a risk survey, and then build a report to actually report the risk management outcomes to the board. So this tool was designed to understand what can actually go wrong along the value chain of the company and how to anticipate these things and make sure the leadership knows about that. That was my first management system. And after that, I decided that it was time to move on and transition from an industry role into a consulting role. I completed a certification as a certified internal auditor and worked in the internal audit space for some time. Compliance audits, financial control audits, which was the second management system I came across. And already here I saw that there's quite some overlap in the way that this was approached. Internal auditors also try to understand what the value chain of company is, the risks along this value chain, the controls, and try to assess their effectiveness. So very, very similar thinking. And then as part of those audits, I came across internal controls, which is another management system, internal controls over financial reporting. It's designed to trace every financial and or operational transaction in the company along its way into the company's balance sheet or profit and loss statement. In other words, how do you make sure that nothing can get manipulated or errors cannot occur during the financial controls and accounting process. So that was the third management system, and guess what? We used process analysis, identified risks along this process, established controls, developed reports, established KPIs, ensured effectiveness. Very similar logic, and after that, I got a lot more exposure to quality management systems, an area that I'm still working on today in my role at Deloitte. This is the fourth management system I got more deeply involved in. As you may know, the life sciences industry is one of the most highly regulated industries, and rightfully so. You cannot hold a pen without being subject to a regulation, and this causes massive effort for documenting risks, assessing controls, procedures, in order to avoid risks for the patients. So what is the QMS, or what are QMS managers doing? They define processes, assess risks, establish controls, define KPIs, monitor deviations. Sounds very familiar to what I explained before. And so it's my job today to help pharma, biotech, and medtech companies to help them avoid over-complexity in their quality and compliance management systems, to harmonize across and within those systems, to simplify these systems, and to remediate if necessary. And this involves also the selection and implementation of software, which then enables processes to be mapped, controls to be assigned, KPIs to be measured, and so on. And one very interesting technology option is, in fact, interfacing, which I'm very happy, which makes me very happy to be here in your webinar series today as a guest. So I'm very happy to share observations from that later. And Alexander, a colleague of mine who will talk about compliance management systems later, has a more specialized focus on compliance management systems. So also this is another area of management systems will find its place in the discussion today. Let's move on to the first slide that I brought you, which shows what actually is a management system. We've here taken the ISO definition of a management system being a set of interrelated or interacting elements of an organization to establish policies and objectives and processes to achieve objectives. It's a very general description, but already shows what a management system is supposed to do. And in smaller organizations, you know, in very small size companies, all of these management systems may be owned by just one person, the CEO or the founder. doing all of that and basically being the management system. And the larger an organization grows, the more need arises to build more sophisticated systems. So this may lead to a situation where management systems pile up, as we are showing here on the left side of the picture. You got more and more systems, you got a new regulation, so you need a new management system. You enter a new market, you have a new product, you need a new management system. So this is how things evolve over time. And this has practical consequences, which we have highlighted on the next slide. And that's the perspective from the end user, the people who are not the board, not top management, but the people who actually have to suffer the consequences or the effects from working in a multitude of management systems. All of these systems define their own processes. They all write their own procedures. They conduct their own surveys, have their own interview series to capture risks, controls, and so on. They try to make their own visualization or mapping of a company's value chain in order to identify risks and assign controls. They measure their own KPIs. And of course, they all prepare their own reports to the board, which then results into a sustainability report, into a risk report, a compliance report, internal audit report that the board or different members of the board receive. On the technology side, this equally has implications, which we see on the next slide. We have very often a scattered technology landscape. All of these systems tend to build their own tools and use their own workflows in order to do what they have to do. They find QMS tools, ERM tools, CMS tools, BPM tools, EHS, and audit tools, all having their own workflows. Some of them in some organizations more integrated, and others less integrated, will have document repositories and databases for each of these systems, and of course a multitude of reports that I was talking about. So what can we actually do about this? On the next slide, we see that our vision is actually to reduce the complexity through more integrated management systems. And that can be done in a number of different ways. Some companies use the PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act methodology as the common interface between all of these different management systems and use that approach to build a common way of working across the different management systems. And other companies are using a value chain or process-driven approach, which is something we would like to talk about a little bit more here. It's not the only answer to the problem. There's several approaches that have shown some successes, and that's an approach we would like to talk about here today, because we find that interfacing offers some interesting perspectives on the process approach to integrated management systems. So all of these different areas, sustainability, quality, health and safety, compliance, environment, risk management, they are all basically perspectives on what the company is doing. They all have their own frames, their own criteria to assess what happens in the value chain. They all have their specific objectives, and they help the management to achieve those objectives and make sure that risks are being identified and controlled in various different ways, and also that compliance with external regulatory requirements can be ensured along this process. So we want to talk about the company's value chain as the common denominator, the central starting point for having an aligned approach to how management systems should be run in order to help employees who are being confronted with the complexity of different management system approaches to better survive and actually be able to do their job instead of building reports and having interviews with all of these different management system representatives. So what does it actually mean to develop a value chain driven approach? Next slide, please. In our vision, we would see the value chain as a starting point, a common understanding of what the company is actually doing on an aggregated level. That's what we see in the middle. And then we would try to put all kinds of perspectives in one integrated software environment to highlight what actually can go wrong along this process. What are the objectives along this process that need to be fulfilled from different angles? What are the risks? What are the defined controls? And all of these should be defined by the different management systems. So when we look at objectives, we have quality objectives, we have sustainability objectives, we have all kinds of other objectives that the different regulations and company strategies require. And that results in risks. Things can go wrong, objectives cannot be met. That results in quality risks, enterprise risks, EHS risks, safety risks, and so on. Corresponding controls, corresponding learning needs, and also timeline commitments. And then ultimately what we would want to see in a software-enabled integrated management system is that this is not just a visualization, not something you look at, not something you print in a procedure. It's something that you can actually live, something that you use for guidance, but also to execute your job in this environment, and that you use for interactive employee guidance, which is why on the right side we have highlighted this topic of Start Workflow. So you look at what you're supposed to do, and then you can actually directly execute all of these activities and trigger compliance workflows, trigger risk workflows, QMS workflows, and so on. So we find today a world where things are being documented in processes, in BPM flowcharts, in all kinds of repositories, and then we find a separate world where these things are being done. And our vision of software-enabled integrated management systems is that all of this takes place in a connected way. Where to start? How do we get there? Is what we can talk about on the next slide. Yeah, exactly. Here we have seen a number of companies moving into this direction and getting to a more integrated approach to building an integrated management system, but it's never easy. And it's definitely not easy to do it all greenfield and all from scratch and all at the same time. So laying the foundations, achieving a common understanding of what the value chain of a company actually is, and then starting to share and talk about these perspectives across the management systems should be the starting point of how you actually get there. So you would usually have one sponsor, one area, one management system that is most interested in getting to the next level, and this one starting point, this starting piece, would then be designed to make it compatible with other management systems through a process-driven approach going forward. But what is the right system to start with? Usually you have a trigger, you've got customer requirements, you've got new regulations, you've got to reorganize the company, you are involved in an M&A situation, you've got the cost reduction objectives. Whatever happens, there is a trigger to start thinking about how do we actually manage the company. Also, what management system would be a good starting point? We see companies starting, for example, with ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 for the quality management system, classical quality management system. But the environment management system is an area where we see very high levels of integration already today. So where there are most attempts to get management systems more integrated along with the environment, health, and safety space. So these are areas where we see lots of initiatives. And how do companies approach this in practice? We see standard to standard comparison mappings as a technical approach of how to get there. You basically take the requirements from all of these different regulatory requirements, and then see what are the common commonalities across these different standards, and try to break this down and see what this means to your value chain. At which point of the value chain do you have which requirements resulting from which management system standard? That's a way of doing this, but usually one of these management system components would be the foundation and laying the start. And then over time, become more and more compatible with the other management systems until ultimately you reach a state which you can count as more integrated or fully integrated later on. And I think now is a good time to take a look at and challenge interfacing to show us a little bit of how this vision of integrated management systems can actually be technically enabled. Since we all know that it's very nice to have a nice document described, it's great to have a nice leadership vision of becoming more integrated. It's great to have the ambition to work in a more cross-business and cross-company way, but making it happen has technical preconditions, technical enablement that is needed. And we would like to challenge interfacing today to demonstrate a little bit of how this may work in your solution environment.
Yes, thank you, Christian. Okay, so I'm preparing my screen sharing. Here we go. So Dan, can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. All right, so actually, we are looking here at an integrated management system right now. Now you might ask, okay, where is the integrated stuff? Well, all I see right now is a business process or is a process in a familiar swim lane view. So where's the integration here? Well, let me show you some integrated management systems which I can bring up here. So this is an incident management process. So it's part of your quality processes or also part of your set of business processes. So first thing is we are looking here at a process management system. I don't go into detail of how you can, like create processes or manage the life cycle of this process. I would rather like to show you how other management systems can, with one or two mouse clicks, can become visible here. So, for example, let's start with risk management, our enterprise risk management system. So, when I, for example, look at this task here in the process, conduct incident investigation, there is a risk associated with it. The lack of resources, the lack of a resource to conduct the incident investigation. At the same time, there is also a control associated here, which is the capacity management for the resources. And if I would like to go more into detail and to understand what my colleagues from enterprise risk management are doing well, then I can kind of drill down into these details and, for example, see that there is, for this particular risk lack of resources, a risk analysis has been done. And here are some of the parameters that become visible, like that the cross risk, that the impact is critical. There is a likelihood, there is a detectability defined, there is a priority, there is a score and a scoring matrix behind it. There is the control and so on. So that's one way how we can take a glimpse into the integrated other management systems. And regarding risk management, let me show you one more aspect here, which is that the colleagues from enterprise risk management, they have also defined a high risk path for this process. So now I've toggled the view, and now we see in red, we see the elements that make up the high risk path. So that is just one example. And let's get into another example of how other management systems are integrated here. Let's go to performance management, to KPIs, KRIs, KCIs. Again, when I take a little bit of a closer look here, then I see that there is, for example, a KPI associated with this task, the number of active instances for this specific task. And at the moment, it's on Amber. That's a live view, a live representation of the current data. So I'm fine with that. Down here is another one. And even here, there's another one. Oops, this one is red. So it seems that there is a bottleneck in this process, which requires definitely my attention. And I can make that integrated performance management view. I can make that even better visible by enabling what we call performance color. And then it's really like the colors, amber, red, it's right in your face, and you know immediately. It's a live view, and you know immediately what you're supposed to do. And let me show you one last integration with other management systems, and that is our quality operations. So it means where there is a documented incident management process, there should also be an automation behind it to manage our actual incidents. So to manage our quality operations. And even here, it's fully integrated. I don't have to switch to another tool or something else. No, all I do is I bring up a form here within the process. Just a sec. It's loading. Yeah, I bring up a form. So an incident for us is a quality event. And then I can just type, I can start to capture the information regarding this. I won't fill out everything. I just want to give you an idea what I can do here. So I say that this quality event, this incident is related to a product. It could also be related to a process, and so on and so on. I can even go more specific and can define the product and so on, the business division, business line. So again, it's just to give you the idea that all those different management systems are available, basically are fully integrated and are available from within my process map. Then there is one more thing I would like to show you. Christian has been explaining an approach, an iterative approach, how you could get started with your integration, with integrating the different management systems. And there, of course, it would be good to have tools that would help you to simplify that process of getting started. And if you remember Christian's slide, he was saying, okay, start off with documenting, for example, your processes or your KPIs or your risks. And usually that is, it sounds trivial, but of course it involves a lot of work. And what I would like to show you is something that can greatly simplify this process. So it's all a question of having the right tools at hand, right? So what I do is allow me to load a Word file here, which I have created. I call it a process charter, and just calling this a demo. All right, so this is my Word document. It's a simple one-page document that I could send out to different departments or different divisions in my organization. And it's really, it's a simple Word template, and you can keep it as simple or as complex at that matter as you like. And you send that to your colleagues, and all they really have to do is to answer those simple questions here and to fill in a simple step-by-step list of the steps of the procedure that this process makes up. And what we can do now is we can, let's say, with our text mining solution here, we can almost automate the process of capturing this information in a tool, in an integrated management system. So what I do here, I will exactly explain to you what I do. So I will now tell the system that this field here in my process charter, this field is the name of the process. The next field is the responsible role for this process. Next field is the process goal. No, that was wrong. Remove. Okay, let me try again. So I said that this is the process goal. Here we go. And this is the process description. And one more thing I do is I also tell for the table below that, I tell it that this has a columns header. Then I start. So this is the sequence number. This is the name of the task. And this is the name of the role. Here we go. Then we can also import assets. or not import, but mark assets. And the last one is the actual procedure for the task. So let's do it like this. Now I've been training our solution here. And if you look now at what happens if I hit the parse button, it automatically is already enabled to read the rest of the document and to kind of to speed up my process. And the last thing now is what I've been doing is I've been now training the system. So it means I can now import like not only this one, but I can like import 100 or 1,000 of these charters in a matter of minutes or hours. And when I click export here, this export was successful. Let me show you what the result is. Just reloading the process tree here, and here it is, the process at import. That's exactly the process that with all the details that we have just seen in this charter. So and that is a tool that can get you started in your efforts to establish an integrated management system really quickly. All right, so I will hand back over now to Alexander. And Alexander,
yeah, exactly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so Christian mentioned in the beginning that we are from Risk Advisory. So I'm a colleague of Christian who works together with my team all around the area of compliance, especially compliance management systems. So this is one of the governance systems a company usually have. And to start with, what are the typical situations of a compliance management systems as we find it? That is that over the last decades, compliance has somewhat established its niche within this reliance model. And then it started working and structured its work according to a formal or informal compliance management systems. So as some of you may recognize, the structure pointed out on this slide is according to the German industry standard from the German Institut der Wirtschaftsprüfer. However, for example, as recently as last year, there's also now a certifiable international standard, an ISO standard, who structured the compliance management systems. However, it's, for the sake of integration, it does not really matter which type of structure you follow. If you have a formal compliance management system, if you have an informal one, if it's integrated into an internal control system, for example, already. So all of this doesn't really matter if it comes to integration. So this should be applicable to all. And what I want to do with you today is share some ideas and share some experience, what it means to start integrating a compliance management system, what are the typical challenges, and also point out a use case, so how it can be done and what are the advantages you may gain if you start integrating your compliance management. So what happens with the compliance management system as well as the compliance function and all is that usually it's kind of a silo within the second line as well as to the third and first line. So basically, it does not speak to other functions like general risk management, like a data protection system, etc. It's not really linked to the actual business, nor does it really well correspond with the internal control system or with the internal audit, etc. Also internally within the compliance management system, that's especially something we see whenever there's a formal compliance management system following some general standard structure. That there's several elements. So, for example, the risk assessment, for example, the communication initiatives, so trainings, etc. They are all not linked with each other. So, at some point in the past, somebody started writing a compliance risk assessment. At another point in the past, somebody made a training concept and lay out some guidelines, for example. But all of these things are not really linked. So what does it lead to is that there are some duplication of efforts. Everything is not really well connected. So what does it mean when we start integrating these things? That would be on the next page. When we start integrating, we have to stop thinking in silos and start thinking in networks, start thinking especially in interfaces. So, for example, if we talk about risk, compliance risk, for example, in the case of a compliance management system, obviously, then there's a link to, for example, controls, obviously. So for every risk, there should be a set of controls. For every control, there's a certain monitoring activity to check if it's really appropriate and effective in place. But also for every risk, there's, for example, the underlying process, the underlying part of the company value chain that triggers this risk. And for example, if we have the three types, so for example, controls, risk, and the processes, we only have like two different, that's something then we can do later. So what we will do then is that we have two interfaces. So we can look at the process and the risks that are associated with this, and the risk and the controls that are related to them. And while we only have like two interfaces which we try to connect to each other, we already have connected three different elements. And that's something that scales very well. The bigger the integration network gets, that's somehow of a snowball effect that at the beginning it's very a high effort, less effective, and the more you get, the more systems you integrate, the more elements you integrate, the more effective it comes, and with every element there is some synergy in the system. So one of the use cases I wanted to show you today is how integrated management systems actually are very great to deal with regulatory change. So what does regulatory change mean? We live in a time where there are ever more new regulations. So for this example, let's start with a new regulation that affects the company. That's one of my first projects I actually did in consulting, my consulting career, and it was a great one. And I think we figured out a great process. So that's one of the things I want to share with you today, is that we start, okay, how do we manage these new regulations? First of all, we obviously have to identify the regulation. So we have to screen for it. We have to screen certain sources of regulation, websites, etc. And then once we have identified a regulation, we add it to our regulatory inventory. Once it's in the regulatory inventory, we have to start the change process. So that's why we then kicked off a change process that might affect the company value chain. That would be the next step. And then the company value chain, or the processes, the way the company works, however you call it, obviously starts changing. So processes are rearranged, guidelines are altered, process descriptions are added, certain templates have to be added, so that the next process that happens usually. The company starts to change things. For example, they drafted a new guideline, and that will be the next step. And not only does the company draft new guidelines, etc., also as part of the implementation process, we look out for certain risk. That would be the next step, so that we identify future compliance risk. So if we have a new regulation, there's always a risk of non-compliance, especially if there are heavy fines involved, etc. The earlier we identify this risk, the earlier we can start to actually develop controls. And these are, once we have developed the controls, it's obviously something that also affects back the company value chain, and also it affects the overall guidelines, etc. They have to be integrated. So this will be basically one of the, if we simplify it, the last step of changing. So that would be the next step on this. And exactly. So the control, we then link back to the general process description, etc. This would be the next step on this. And after everything is done, for the last step, there's a last quality gate. And this quality gate basically checks if everything has to be changed, if the change is complete, if the documents are updated, the risk assessment is done, the controls are implemented, if everything is done, and if so, the project is marked as complete. So that would be the last stage. And as a feature, we then implemented a back loop into the regulatory inventory, so that we can see when we open the regulatory inventory, and at the end we had several thousands of regulations in this inventory. But especially for those who came recently then and were implemented as part during the project, we can actually check on if they are still in implementation, if they are completely implemented, and also obviously check all of the other aspects. So for example, we could check in which compliance risk do they result, which controls relate to this regulation, which processes are affected, and also in which guidelines this regulation has had some impact. So to give a practical example, during the entire project we did with our client, the new whistleblower guidelines on a new level came up. So for those who are not familiar with this, the legislator changes the way companies have to deal with whistleblowing and how they have to protect the employees or the external parties that whistleblow. And what does it mean? We identified it, it was screened, it was added to the regulatory inventory, and then the company started changing. We started this change process. We identified certain things that needed to be changed. For example, if it comes to processes, guidelines, etc., we discovered that we had to change certain HR processes, certain HR documents. We had to a little bit alter the existing whistleblowing process to ensure anonymity, to ensure confidentiality, to ensure certain timely case management, etc. And obviously, we also then identified which are the compliance risks. So for example, that a case is not dealt with in 7 days, which is a requirement. So that it, for whatever reason, is not worked on. And we could also then very easily define a good control. That is that there's an automated system to check if a case is older than 5 days, 6 days, and then ring an alert that there has to be an answer to the whistleblower in the first place to fulfill the complement. So what I wanted to explain with this process is that once a regulation is identified and you have an integrated system that has several interfaces to several other aspects, even just within the compliance management system, your entire organization starts to become more flexible and everything becomes a little bit more transparent. So after all, what happened is, maybe then you can skip one more step to the regulatory inventory, that after all, we then, for the last step, could confirm that the company was now in compliance with the future whistleblowing guidelines. So then we are could mark this as complete and successful. That would be the last step. And exactly, success. What we then did was actually quite fascinating. We didn't come up with it. It was the actually the development part of the company from our client that approached us and said, okay, we do not only have certain processes, certain guidelines, etc. we need to change. We also have our development process, and it is affected by a lot of regulatory change because the development process in this case was very over several years. And it happens more than once that, for example, the safety standards for the product they were working on changed during the time of the development. So they changed, the requirements changed, and we then adapted this process. We still use the same regulatory inventory. However, what we did is we built a first interface with the quality management system. The quality management system was in charge to take care that the product development, the product developed after all, fulfills its quality criteria, safety criteria. And so then it wasn't the compliance risk assessment we were triggering, but it was the quality risk assessment we were triggering. And it was controlled not based on a compliance level, but more on a quality level that were changed. And we didn't change general guidelines for the company, but more so we changed the project management of the development. And we also implemented the same quality gate that once the change in the development process is completely implemented, it can be green lighted, and it's very transparent that the current projects they're working on all already adapted this new regulation for safety, for example. So this was one great use case where, as you see, we did not completely integrate every system. We did not completely integrate every element of the compliance management system. That's the overall goal at the end. But even by just integrating a few elements of the compliance management system and also building a small interface to the quality management system, we really leverage the impact that every element on its own has on the company and really improve the way they deal with regulatory change. So this was the use case I wanted to highlight to you. And I guess next would be Marco to show a little bit how it can be done in the system as well.
Yes, indeed, Alexander. So what I would like to show you is how exactly, following up on the use case that Alexander has presented, how the right tool to have the right tool in place can greatly simplify your efforts of managing regulatory change, which is always challenging. Let me give you like a 2-minute. I cannot present the whole use case or how we support the whole use case, but let me just highlight a few elements to you so that you get an idea. So here we have a process now which is called disaster recovery, and associated to this process or applied to this process is a regulation. And if we take a closer look at this regulation, it's actually a regulation that is part of the European Union's clinical trial directive. So we are in life sciences here, and it's one of the articles in there. And let's not pretend that this regulation would change. So I'm making a quick change here, just in the wording. So I would just say here add section. Add section, here we go, and I'm publishing this new version because it is it's taking effect immediately. And now this challenge would start. So how do I implement this change regulation in all my different management systems? So a good starting point would be to understand what is the impact of this change. So I probably first do an impact analysis. Here is my change regulation, and here are all the objects from all the different management systems that are impacted. Like, for example, the process that I've been mentioning. Here's another process. For example, if I take a look at this other process, it means if I would change this process, what would be the impact here again? I can make a drill down and from this process, and I see what the impact on other objects might be. So that is always a good starting point. And now, if I go back to my process, if you remember where this regulation is associated with, you now see there is no warning. It tells me, wait, wow, your process here is out of sync. So there is still the old version of the regulation is associated with it, but you're supposed to update to the current version. And so here I could, for example, kick off an automated workflow, an improvement request that would then govern the implementation and the change management of what's coming downstream in order to implement the change regulation. So that was a very quick glimpse of how the right tool can help you to stay on top of regulatory management. And back to you, Alexander. I think you want to add something there? You're on mute, Alexander. Can you check again, please?
Sorry. Yeah. No worries. So to close out this presentation, I just wanted to add a few things why I think integrating the compliance management system is the way to go. So basically why this is something you should definitely consider. So first of all, it greatly increases transparency, the effectiveness and the efficiency of the entire work of the compliance department, of the business that is affected by it, etc. Especially I want to highlight transparency because it's something that is usually very missing, especially in the compliance context. It's very hard to see, for example, which regulation does affect which type of process, which type of department, which type of product. And that's something that could easily be achieved by just integrating a few parts of the compliance management system with each other. The second point is that as the entire second line or just the entire GSC environment has to digitalize at some point. It's the general trend is digitalization, and we should really embrace it also in the 3 lines model. And this is one of the ways to go because the way platforms, the way systems think is integrated. They think in networks, and that's something also our frameworks should keep up with to be fit for the future. And for the last point, that's something to look out as to become more resilient to the ever-growing speed of regulatory change. The legislator over the last couple of years slowly but surely increases the speed of which he pumps out regulation that affect companies. And they won't stop with it. If anything, it will speed up even more. For example, just one last food for thought, there's an upcoming AI regulation on a European level, which will require companies to do a lot of things, a little bit similar to the Data Protection Act. And as one thing, for example, it will be important for companies to identify which type of process, which type of activities uses artificial intelligence, with artificial intelligence very loosely defined as part of the AI Act. So basically every computer system that has somewhat of an intelligence function, somewhat of an algorithm could count as an artificial intelligence application. So maybe just food for thought after this presentation, would your organization be able, with few efforts, to really identify the processes that uses certain AI applications, which are these applications, and be able to rate them on a risk score? If that's something you are super confident that your company could easily do, you really already have a great system in place. If not, that's something to keep in mind, and maybe to look out that this would be one good step, starting point for future integration of the system. So that's 3 points I just wanted to add it, to take a little bit of a look in the future, and just to formally close out as our typical disclaimer, all the things presented to you today are obviously just general information, and if you need any specific advice on your specific company needs, if you want to stay in touch with us, please feel free to reach out to Christian or me, and we will help you discuss everything. So thank you from my side for your.
Thank you, Alexander. Well, we now have some time to answer a few questions that you've submitted during the session. I know you've received a lot of information today, and it looks like we do have a few questions here to ask Christian, Alexander, or Mirko. Let's see, the first question looks like a Christian question, I think. Have you had any lessons learned from management integration systems, and if there are any pitfalls to avoid?
Yeah, sure. Then I think I can take that one up. Thanks for the question. So what are lessons learned from approaching management system integrations? First lesson learned is takes time. Nothing you can do overnight. Second lesson learned is you should be patient and not sacrifice or dilute the effectiveness of one system for the sake of integration or harmonization. So this integration and harmonization is not the end goal. It's something that allows us to work in a more efficient way, but by doing that, we don't want to cause additional risks that come from exactly that act of integrating or harmonizing. So this process of walking all of the stakeholders through finding a harmonized methodology is something that companies need to go through, unless they are still so small and in growth mode that it can naturally evolve in building up company governance structures. But overall, of course, you have to balance the risk of sacrificing the integrity of existing and working and effective management systems against the need for harmonization and integration. Then another lesson learned perhaps is that thinking in systems is challenging for many people in an organization. Often we find a people-centric culture. Many stakeholders are thinking in names, in people who are doing specific activities. And if you ask them for governance, roles, responsibilities, or even like management system documentation, this is overwhelming for companies that are following a rather people-driven culture. That needs to be overcome, and educating in terms of what does it actually mean to have a management system? What's the systemic way of approaching risks and controls and objectives is something where education needs to take place at the beginning. And then lastly, perhaps do not let audits and inspections disrupt the integrity of your newly integrated system. Because what usually happens, biggest driver of change in management systems of any kind is audits and inspections. You've got an auditor or an inspector coming to you telling you that this process is not compliant, needs to be changed. And what happens is you write a new procedure, you have a new role, you have a new person responsible for that. And this should not disrupt the integrity of your whole integrated system, but instead be very carefully adapted and be worked in to then apply and comply with this audit finding or remediate the inspection result.
Thanks, Christian. I see that we're fast approaching the top of the hour, so we're probably going to stop with the Q&A now. I would like to once again thank Christian and Alexander for their insightful presentation today on reducing governance complexity with integrated management systems. I'd also like to add again that Interfacing offers a digital twin software solution that documents, analyzes, improves, digitizes, and monitors your business processes. For more information on our Enterprise Process Center digital business platform can be found at interfacing.com or send us an email at sales@interfacing.com. If you wish to contact Deloitte directly, you can do so through the contact information here for both Christian and Alexander, which we'll be sending to all attendees in the follow-up slide deck. If you don't have EPC yet, you can download directly, and you can do so through you can download your own fully functional free trial of EPC today and request live demonstration at interfacing.com. Book a demo. Additionally, we'd love for you to join our Interfacing community, where you can complete a free BPMN 2.0 certification and EPC modeler training program, as well as participate in our discussion forums and look through our most common FAQs. So to close out, thank you for attending. Soon after this webinar, you'll receive a brief survey and an email where you can download and share today's presentation. You'll also have our contact information. So I urge you to reach out if you have any questions regarding your process-based initiatives. With that, I'd like to wish you all a good morning, a good day, or a good evening. Take care, stay safe, and talk to you soon.